Hello, everyone, and welcome to Navigating the Maze, Lessons on Safe Harbor Protocol Teaming. My name is Sarah Florman, and I'm the Trafficking Policy Coordinator at the Sexual Violence Justice Institute within the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And let me introduce you to all of the panelists today.
My name is Alan Bakke. I'm the Southwest Minnesota Regional Navigator. I work at the Southwest Crisis Center. We are located in Worthington, Minnesota, Nobles, Pipestone, Jackson, Cottonwood, Rock counties. The Safe Harbor Navigator team that I've worked with is actually Brown, Blue Earth, and Nicollet counties in the South Central region now.
I was muted there. There we go. John Bowen, Assistant Wright County Attorney. I work in Buffalo. Been an attorney for about 15 years. Been doing child protection, criminal for most of that time. And our team is pretty much comprised of law enforcement, social workers, advocates from the Wright County area, from Buffalo, the local police departments, and we do have some regional partners as a part of our team, including Kate LePage, who actually is also our navigator.
Hello, I'm Catherine Cross with Hope Coalition in Goodhue County. I've been the coordinator of our sexual assault multidisciplinary team for over 6 years, and I also coordinate the Safe Harbor Protocol team. Much like John, our team is comprised of law enforcement, advocacy, medical, social services, and our team formed 2 years ago when funding was first available for protocol development.
Hi, I'm Kate LePage. I'm the East Central Safe Harbor Regional Navigator. I cover counties Aiken, Todd, Crow Wing, Morrison, Pine, Kennebec, Mille Lacs, Stearns, Sherburne, Benton, and Wright County. I had new counties added, and I feel like it messed up my whole spiel there. But I work with Lutheran Social Service. I coordinate the Crow Wing County protocol, which actually just started with this recent round of funding. So we're in our first year, and then I've been blessed to be a part of the Wright County protocol as well.
All right. So one of the first things that I want to do is ask the folks attending today, where in Minnesota are you located? So I'm going to launch a poll, and you can feel free to vote in your response. All right, I'm going to end polling. The East Metro is out in full effect today. So we've got a lot of folks from the metro area, some folks from Southeast, Central, West Metro, Northwest. Awesome. Good to have you all here. All right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to break up our conversation into 4 kind of main topic areas. And then the panelists are going to talk a little bit about each of these areas. And what I'd really like from attendees is for you all to ask questions, either in the chat box or in the Q&A as they come to you, like kind of focusing ideally on these 4 topic areas. So when we get to the end of some of our conversation on the protocol process, then we'll go to participant question or audience questions on the protocol process. And I'll try to remind folks to type in questions at the start of each section. And we'll also have some time at the end for any follow-up or wrap-up questions that we don't get to. All righty, so we're going to be talking about the protocol process. We're going to spend some time talking about incorporating survivor voices into our protocols, some conversations about training and implementation, and then we're going to talk a little bit about sustainability and what the continuation process looks like once your protocol is complete. All right, so I want to ask another question before we get started to our audience members. So I'm going to launch another poll. This one is asking, what discipline do y'all work in? And if you're typing other, please feel free to type in the chat what you do within the Safe Harbor world. Advocacy, evaluation. Awesome. Regional navigators, excellent. Nice to see you all. Ah, somebody who does all of the things. All right, thanks everybody. All right. So when we're talking about the protocol process, this is kind of, it's a tough question because it seems like a complicated process. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things to think about. And I think one of the things when working with all of these teams across Minnesota that we realized was that there's a lot of considerations that you couldn't possibly have planned for. So I think one of the first questions I want to ask our panelists is, what parts of this process stood out to you, either as a highlight or maybe unexpected issue that came up?
Sarah, I can jump in here on this. Again, this is John Bowen from Wright County. And, I think when we're working on protocol development, I think who you have on your team is almost as important as what you do as a team. Is that because, and really what I'm trying to get at is saying that your team composition is critical. Having the right people on your team is critical. Doing that legwork in the early stages. And I don't know where folks are at here today, our attendees, but getting the right people, forming those relationships early, those are really the important things from my perspective in the process. Getting that fundamental piece underway is so important. So, the question was, what parts stood out as highlights or struggles. I think the real wins for us were when we developed our team. I don't know, when you start a team, whether you really know what everybody's strengths are. So seeing that there were people who maybe I hadn't expected to be ultra motivated, were very motivated, took over a lot of the writing, editing, were always raising their hand. But how do you get there? How do you find out who those people are? And I'll talk about this a little bit more, I think, in other comments this morning. But I think one thing is getting to know your team. Get to know those team members and sort of establish those personal relationships with your team members. Then I think then they start to be a little more forthcoming and volunteering more. So I think that was a huge plus for me, is just having those unexpected people just pop up and say, okay, raise their hand. As far as the struggles go, in protocol development, one thing is there's, like we said, you'll hear this, that there's a lot of moving parts. You might have 12 disciplines at the table. I know there's people from West Metro, from East Metro here, lots of different police departments, lots of different agencies being represented. And what's hard is that when you think you have the representation, let's just say for us, it was schools. We thought we had good representation from the schools. We thought we had them really dialed in. And then we realized that maybe we didn't have the commitments from our local school districts. And so that was a struggle, is once you think you have your team in place, and then you realize maybe you didn't have the right people in place. Sorry for that long-winded answer, but this is one of the real fundamentals, though, of the protocol process, in my opinion.
I agree with everything that John just said about building your team, and sometimes your table changes and you have the wrong people at the table, but they bring in the right people. It's a process. It's always changing. The other thing that I think of when I think of the protocol process that you maybe wouldn't expect to be as big of an issue as it is the language that's used. Legal language has been a constant conversation in the Crow Wing County Protocol, and actually was talked about quite a bit in the Wright County Protocol that I was able to be a part of as well. And I think that we have, when we bring a group of system workers or government workers who are doing, prosecution or investigations, the language that they use is going to be very different than the language that advocacy is going to want used in the protocol. And just being aware and having an open conversation of why there's pushback to language like shall and will in a protocol, I think is really important, because it sheds light on, okay, so we talked about prosecution, why they don't want shall and will unless it's related specifically to statute language. And that's because a defense attorney could take that protocol and pick apart your case. So just having those open conversations to understand why we're saying the things that we are and why the pushback is there. And then we can start to build language that reflects best practices, but still offers some of that gray space to be able to work the job as needed as different cases come through. The other thing we could do, and this is what we're planning in Crow Wing County to kind of mitigate some of that as well and hold each other accountable, is through the ongoing process of evaluating how our protocol is going, continuing to meet as a group, and then the education piece. So the commitment to education on the protocol, commitment to ongoing education in consultation, so that we're making sure that even though we're saying, we're not using the word shall never prosecute somebody that is maybe a recruiter or a bottom, but we know in our mind that's not ever our plan. So we're going to make sure that we're staying on each other's, up with each other and making sure that we're holding each other accountable to that with training as well.
I'll jump in here too a little bit. One of the parts of the process that really stood out to me is that when you think about writing protocol, especially if you're doing it from scratch, that there's nothing really in place, it can be rather an intimidating and daunting process. And that can cause a lot of, I guess, stagnation. Like, where do we go? Where do we begin? What do we do? And so one of the things that Sarah actually had helped us with in our process too, in the midst of it, is really putting together a timeline, taking a look at what things that are achievable and when you're going to do them. It really helps engage and motivate and stay on track of where to begin, what will come next, and how to really proceed forward. Without that, there can be just a whole lot of talking around the subjects instead of actually getting to the subject. So first and foremost in the process is develop that process. What is that timeline going to look like? It helps tremendously.
Awesome comment though from Terry. Talking about, having the right people is great, but having the common beliefs amongst the team members, really that's a great comment though. Because I think that is kind of the fundamental aspect of this, is the people on the team need to be on the same page. As far as, we need to hold people accountable. We need to, treat perpetrators and buyers, basically the same in terms of, take it seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the question of accountability is one of those that came up pretty quickly with a lot of the teams, and really a mutual understanding of, the severity of this issue and the need to find a way to prosecute and hold accountable the folks who are doing the buying and also the facilitating of trafficked youth.
And I can speak to that just really quick here, if you don't mind. That was something in Crow Wing that we talked about in our orientation. What is this, or I should say our first meeting after the orientation? What is our plan with this protocol? Is this protocol solely to be, how are we going to respond to minors that are involved in trafficking and exploitation? Or are we going to bite off a big chunk and talk about how are we going to respond to adults, since there's currently, Safe Harbor for All is a discussion, but it's not put into practice yet. So are we going to bite that off? Are we going to also talk about how we're going to respond to traffickers and buyers? And Crowing decided to do it all. So our that protocol is overarching. It is complicated to add in all those factors, but it's definitely doable if that's something that your community is looking to tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me a little bit, folks, about the kinds of conflicts that come up within the work of a team like this.
It's interesting when you think about conflict and how to avoid it. Is it going to happen? Does it happen? Conflicts happen in life, every single thing. There isn't anything that we're not going to have some sort of different viewpoint, or and whether or not they move into a disagreement is another subject. But I take a look at the protocols and the development and the process that we were doing, even with well-established relationships, because the people I worked with, phenomenal people, great people who have been working together for a long time. Conflict can really exist over all sorts of things that are really unbeknownst to you as you come into this process. There can be conflicts over personalities. There can be conflicts over past case interactions where one is feeling like, well, this got let down in the process, or someone didn't fulfill their responsibilities. There can be structural alignments. I was working with 3 different counties, and so conflicts can exist with the structural alignments there. And then there's internal politics that take place, and how are things going to be actually decided through that whole process. And really nothing can be assumed other than that conflict happens. And I think that recognizing that right away, if you assume that, it helps. But one of the things that I really think helps overcome those conflicts is having a core set of principles, something to guide you, what's going to be your source documents, and the source documents, then the things that you believe in, the things that are important, can help you take the personalities and take the personal feelings out of the conflict by saying, well, let's examine this in light of what we said are our core values, our core beliefs, and our guiding principles. How does this conflict that we're having here right now over whatever the issue might be, how does that fit with what we said up front? And if you have those things well established up front, it can really help remove a lot of the conflict, or at least be able to solve the conflict as it's happening in a very appropriate way, instead of it becoming something that overrides everything.
Yeah, I think when you start off, I think that's critical. For us, I guess the question, is about what kind of conflicts arise, and one conflict, that we saw pretty early is in how we use language. And I think that's something a lot of people, including myself, are still working on and adjusting to really making sure that our language is appropriate. And, as a prosecutor, as somebody who's, worked in my position and, is familiar with law enforcement, I think some of the language law enforcement might use might not be something that advocacy might always, approve of, or would be appropriate really in these kinds of circumstances. So I think we did have a couple of conflicts about what kind of language you're using during these meetings. And I think that, it goes back to team building. I think understanding that if a prosecutor's at the table, a lot of times these are people who do want to learn, and we need to get to know our team members and understand that people aren't necessarily coming into this with bad intentions. And by getting to know each other, I think that we kind of break down those barriers and those silos. And so I think that that's a way that at least you can't avoid the conflict, but if you get to know your team members, know that they're there in good faith, know that they are trying, then at least you can mitigate some of the possible fallout from those, if this is making any sense. But really, it's about those personal relationships. And when you know somebody personally, I think a lot of that suspicion goes away about their motivations, and we realize that we're here for the same purpose.
And I can kind of jump in here. way back at the beginning when we were doing our, bringing our team together, we did a team orientation, and we kind of developed some of those team principles or core principles that our team could fall back on as conflict came up with the team and with the protocol development. And then this was mentioned before, we did struggle with always having key players or disciplines that participated with protocol development, but just knowing we had to move forward with writing that protocol and still try to continue to engage those disciplines.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that I think all of the teams spent some quality time sitting with is that conflict is inevitable. And it's also the key to everything. It's really the place where protocol comes to life. The conflict areas are also the areas that our young people are struggling with when they're entering our systems. And I'm a big fan of saying conflict is generative, right? If you can work through it, you can grow, and the team can become stronger. So we have a couple audience questions. One from Jen. In Hennepin County, we're struggling with adding a survivor rights section into the protocol. And they really wanted this to be a resource for survivors and systems professionals. So I know at least one team, looking at you, Catherine, has done this. For folks who've done this, how did you complete this process? What do you think, Catherine? Want to weigh in?
Sorry, too many things up, couldn't find the mute button. Yes, we developed a survivor Bill of Rights that I'm happy to share after the webinar. And really, we just took key pieces from other teams from other states that had kind of put similar things together and really focused on the core principles that were guiding our protocol and what we felt was important for survivors. So some of those rights are you have the right to refuse any services offered to you, or the right to you can choose to report to police or not, or the right to have a medical forensic examination free of charge, the right to ask questions about the process, and things like that.
And we don't have, excuse me, a Bill of Rights as Catherine does, and we're still early on in our process in Crow Wing County. But what we have done is embedded those rights throughout the protocol so that if you're only reading your section or you're needing to check on something throughout each of the section, whether it's advocacy or medical or law enforcement, we've embedded kind of where victims, survivors have rights. And again, best practices. If someone does decide to report to law enforcement or just even initially talk to law enforcement before they make an official report, what are that individual's rights for like where that takes place and not forcing anything upon them. Excuse me. So I love that idea, Catherine. And I believe that was a question from Jen in Hennepin County. Definitely something that in one of our future revisions would be a great thing to add in, but having them spread out throughout, I think is a good idea too.
Absolutely. So we have another question. What is some relational language that you found that works for team building? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. So I might not be asked or answering it correctly, but I'm just looking back at some of my old materials. And we had a team orientation and we talked about norms and agreements between our members. And Sarah can talk about this because Sarah is the one who really helps develop this type of language, I think, or at least is pretty conversant in it. And we had some agreements that we came up with as a team right at the outset. And we kind of just got it out there that we would, how are we going to make our decisions, and how are we going to move forward, and how are we going to make these meetings productive? How are we going to demonstrate respect for ourselves, for each other, for our victims, survivors? And we basically just established a set of norms, especially regarding that respect for others and respect for survivors is, hearing each other out and, working on changing our language, like I talked about before, because, as an assistant county attorney, we're not trained and always sensitive about, what language we're using. And really, understanding that, and that respect piece is important because it really changes your whole mindset. When what's coming out of your mouth, when you're thinking about that actually, rather than just saying what comes off the top of your head, I think that you're taking that time to be mindful and respectful. And so those are the kind of some of the norms that we had addressed. Sarah, I don't know if there was anything you had thought of.
I mean, I could talk all day about this because this part is my favorite part. But this isn't about talking to me about all of this. It's about
right. No, I know, but you did such a nice job putting that together. So
yeah, no, what I will say is I think, team building is absolutely critical. And one of the things that I have worked to help all of these teams and all the coordinators on the teams really embrace is the fact that even though people have a tendency to, poo-poo the touchy-feely stuff, right? Nobody wants to do the team building exercise. No one wants to do the icebreaker. That especially when we're in our professional roles, that talking, opening up and sharing our feelings is not always the most comfortable or easy thing to do. But really, when you're working on these teams, trying to find ways to do that, to let people be their authentic selves while also making it a safe space for people to disagree, to ask questions, to not know the answer is really key. And kind of like the point that you had made earlier, John, that you really need to have that trust. You need to be able to build those relationships so that you can have these authentic conversations. And that the process for that looks different with everybody, but
I think too, is just not assuming bad intent. Right, John said it's a learning process. We're all coming in with different lenses, with different experiences. So not assuming bad intent, but using it as a time to educate on your point of view. Sometimes it's finding a happy medium because I'm not prosecuting cases. I don't know the legal language in and out like John would. Same with law enforcement. We're all playing a different role and we all have a different lens. So giving some grace and finding common grounds to begin some of those discussions is really good. But if you come in assuming bad intent due to difference in language, or maybe someone hasn't had education on what is best language to use around this topic, and we start to put up walls, and then it's really hard to take those down if that happens at the beginning. So I would say having some grace too is important.
I think I totally concur on what both Kate and John had said on that. But I think also acknowledging that up front, that whole part that, let's say, while we may not think that there's going to be conflict, because actually the group that I work with, because they've been working together so long on different things, they go, oh, not going to be a problem. We know each other. We work with each other and all that. And then forgetting about some of the things where there might have been some issues of conflict in the past, because they got over them. But knowing that conflict will arise again is to say, acknowledge it up front, and then to be able to talk about, but let's know that there's no intent. We agree that there's no intent. It may be a misunderstanding, a misperception, a different way of articulating things, about saying things, just a different perspective that you might be looking at, and that you come together to work out the solutions, to bring them together. Some of that might be by compromise, others by being able to gain a new perspective on something. And that if we really have that understanding that, yep, we acknowledge that there's going to be some conflict, but we are here for a better purpose, and we will use whatever tools and resources that we can put in their structures and stuff to be able to overcome them. And again, I think those core values in the beginning become a way that remove all those things. It's not as difficult as what one would, again, I keep thinking back to when we began, how daunting of a process it looks at the beginning. As you work with everyone having the intent of putting together something that is going to be person-centered, that is going to be helping people who are in crisis, and knowing and realizing that everybody is committed to their jobs and to this process, that's kind of some of the grace that gets you actually through this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to move on to our next topic, which is incorporating survivor voices. So reminder again to the audience, please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to them regarding incorporating survivors. But I will start by saying this is one of those areas that we have always within Safe Harbor talked about as being crucial to the process, to anything that we do with Safe Harbor. It's also something that we're not always very good at doing. We talk about survivor leadership and we talk about all of these things, and we're not always great at practicing it. And we're working on figuring out how to do that in a way that's both not harmful to survivors and not tokenism, but also very collaborative and generative that moves these teams forward. So what are some of the methods that your teams used when you were talking about including survivors in this process?
You know, I can jump in here. You know, I mean, we do have some survivor representation on our team. I think it's important, you know, I'm not a survivor, but what I've learned though is obviously I don't want to be putting survivors on the spot. So, you know, we might have a survivor on our team, but I don't want to always be looking at them and saying, you know, hey, what do you think about this or this? And, you know, our survivor on our team is in another discipline area and works as a systems professional. But so, I mean, we've had that consistently throughout the process, but we really wanted to get some very intensive survivor input. And so Kate LePage was very gracious and located some 3 survivors throughout the state who might be willing to give us some feedback on our protocol. So I sent it out to them. They gave some feedback on it. We're going to have a panel discussion next week where they're going to present their feedback to our larger group. I think what was important for me to really learn throughout, you know, just going to Safe Harbor trainings and working in this field for a little bit is that, you know, compensation's key. You can't just ask somebody for their opinion, or, you know, ask them to do work, ask them, you know, to be involved and not compensate them. So we're not just saying, you know, tell us your story kind of thing. We're saying you have expertise through life experience, through professional experience. Let us pay you for that. The money part's hard because, you know, budgets are being trimmed everywhere, especially in the nonprofit, especially we're going to have a state budget shortfall. I don't know what money is going to be available, but you have to pay people and you have to give them clear expectations as to when they'll get paid. And so, you know, we do have a panel now who are, you know, going to be providing that really in-depth feedback. And the feedback we've gotten from these survivors so far is incredible. And is far beyond, it's just so comprehensive. We have a draft done of our protocol, but I gotta say, after hearing more of the survivor input, we're gonna be back to the drawing board on a lot of the pieces of our protocol, which is good.
So last year, we were in the process of establishing a youth advisory council with local schools and other local youth programs. And we are hoping that having a youth advisory council could really inform the work of the team and inform protocol. And then also being able to provide gift cards to help with participation to those youth that participated and And of course, now given everything that's going on, that project with distance learning is kind of put on hold for now, but we're hoping to come back to that to really get those youth advisory councils set up in some of our schools. We also, like the Wright County team, are able to work with survivors and pay them as consultants so they can review our protocol and provide feedback to our team. And so we can really use that feedback for future training and then future protocol revisions. We also, as a team, developed a brochure that includes those survivor bill of rights that I already talked about, and also a QR code. So that way, if victims and survivors see that, they can quickly access a survey where they can provide ongoing feedback about our system response, and we can always be taking a look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the things that folks need to really know when they're thinking about the best ways to include survivors in terms of equity and also safety?
Excuse me, sorry, I was sending a message quick to Sarah. Wow. So one of the things that we did and we're doing in Crow Wing County is originally we had youth that we talked with. So our protocol team was really set on, we want some youth survivor voice before we even initiate anything so that we know, when we first put pen to paper that we're at least following some guidelines from the youth. And so what we did is we sent out an anonymous survey and we offered gift cards to any youth that were wanting to participate. And the reason I bring this up is because I want to talk about the payment to survivors for their time. Now, when we were talking about youth, normally youth have some form of assistance, either there, and the youth we reached out to were connected to Safe Harbor. So we only sent it out to Safe Harbor partners so that we were getting youth that were participating that had a support system in place. And that were, in some way confirmed to be eligible for Safe Harbor services so that we were catching the right population. So we know that they're receiving assistance through, family members, through county, through Safe Harbor programs. They're not paying bills necessarily, right, for the most part. So when we bring in survivor voice for adults that are consulting, and this is part of their job, they have bills to pay. And so we want to make sure that we're paying them according to the federal standard. And I believe that was mentioned in a comment or a question that came through. That federal standard is around $81 a day, I believe. And so that's what they...
It's $81.25 per hour or up to $6.50 per day.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was just spitballing here. But yeah, we want to pay that federal standard and we want to pay with money instead of gift cards if at all possible, because they need to be able to pay their bills. And this is how they're working. Just like I don't get paid in gift cards for coming into work as a navigator every day. So really respecting their time that way. And I know, Alan, I think you have a lot to talk about contracts, but one thing that I think is really, really important is, similar with survivor voice that are adults, same with youth, being really transparent about what the information they're providing is going to be used for, who's going to see it, how long we're going to have access to it, or how long we can use it. So being really clear about that up front and giving people the opportunity to remain anonymous if they would like. That's something in Wright County and I've built a relationship with those survivors. And so we're actually going to be working with them in Crow Wing County as well. But that was how it started out originally, as somebody had never spoken publicly about it. And so she took a while to decide if she would be comfortable sitting in front of a group of people and saying her name. And so we did a small focus group with just myself and John to begin with, and really trying to find ways to offer that anonymity for them. And then again, like I said, making sure that they have opportunity to tell us how long we can use their information or their voice, and what ways are appropriate to use it.
Yeah, I'll pick up from that because Kate really segued into kind of some of the things that we had done. From the very beginning, we knew the importance and valued the importance of having a survivor as a professional input and guidance to what we were doing. And when we've all, in the various disciplines that we've worked at, we've contracted with professionals, um, arranging for their services and their input and their expertise, we decided that a contract needed to be done. And the contract, certainly the who, what, where, when, why, all of those specifics and things that are in there. But it really went on to really guide, I guess, our approach to it. It wasn't necessarily in any way really intended in holding the other person accountable. It was holding us accountable. How do we view this person? Are we truly respecting this person and valuing the input and using that? And so by developing the contract that provided then safety features for that person too, and ownership of the information as well that they were sharing, because this is their content, not ours. They should have ownership to it, and they should have say in how long those things should be. So we included information pertaining to that, as well as the things as far as the date and the time and the compensation. And the compensation again was that $650 per day plus mileage we included in there as well, knowing that that can be a different factor. We had the contract signed before, so that it would all be set up, and that in that contract it specifies then when they would get the check and how they would be getting it. We had the conversations in advance, asking them those things though too before we just developed a contract. We asked that person and mentioned some of the things that we thought would be important for a contract, and really negotiated that contract with them, giving them ownership and voice in how that would look. And we really felt that that was something that helped us to really continue to value that person throughout the process, not only in the beginning part, but then in the evaluation aspects of the end.
And I think too, being again transparent with financial means that you have through your protocol. So setting up the stage right away with, we have so much money to pay you for this much amount of time, so that people aren't going over that and then working for free. So we want to make sure that we're paying people for all of their time that they're putting into it. And if that means that they get through 3/4 of the protocol, then let's reevaluate if we have any budget to move around to pay them to get through the rest. But we also don't want them to continue working on that and work for free. We want to make sure they're getting paid for all of their time, whether that's conversations about the protocol, reviewing the protocol, making their comments, doing focus groups, or speaking on panels, whatever it may be. Right now we're in the middle of a pandemic, so we don't have to do mileage. But that's definitely something, Alan, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's huge as well, and should definitely be added into the equation if it's in person. I do see a message. Sarah, do you mind if I answer Terry's question?
Which one?
Oh, is there more than one, Terry?
Well, we've got a comment in the chat box that I have not read yet, but yeah, feel free. So the question is, do any of you counsel survivors before and after they provide feedback? And yeah, Kate, I know that this was something that came up with Wright County in particular, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess I want to be clear, I'm not a therapist. So I think I want to just clarify, when I say counsel, I don't mean therapy. And I don't know if that was what you were intending in your question, Terry, but I want to just be very clear on that. Because I think that, there's a big difference between supporting, talking through things, and then also providing therapy and counsel. So for the council, I talked with all 3 survivors for Wright County that are now also going to be participating in Crow Wing County at length multiple times throughout the process of them reviewing it. They had my attention as they needed it. If things came up, we talked through what the payment was going to look like, what the time amount allotment was going to look like, and of how we were going to use their voice with a small focus group prior to them beginning or accepting the role in the protocol. So really we laid it out for them. We also talked about any concerns they might have, which again brought up the concern of remaining anonymous for one of the survivors. We talked about ways that they could remain anonymous. We really tried to talk through any concerns that they might have. And then they've continued to talk with me. So we've checked in afterwards. After our focus group, I checked in with each of the survivors to see how they were doing, to see if they had anything to follow up with, to make sure that they were billing appropriately, because that's big too, making sure that people actually bill for their time. Because I think that a lot of survivors that I've come in contact with will short themselves. And so having some really honest discussions about their value and how much we value their opinions and perspective. So I don't know, again, if that's what you were talking about. I do, when I work with survivors ongoing, because I do consult with a few survivors on a regular basis just within my work. And we talk about, what avenues they have for mental health care and different needs that they have. So those are ongoing discussions, and I think they should be ongoing if you are intending to work with survivors.
Yeah.
And I think,
Oh, go ahead,
sorry,
John.
go ahead. Well, I think that when I don't have obviously the skill that Kate does, or Kate obviously went the extra mile and really did everything right, I think, in dealing with our survivors. But I think one thing I try to do at least is let them try to drive the discussion. And I wasn't asking a lot of questions. I wasn't saying, tell me about this, this happened to you, or I wanted them to kind of just provide me their input and sort of let them dictate how the discussion would go, more or less. I would kind of give some general guidelines and some, and ask some general questions about the protocol. But I wanted them to drive the process and to share what they felt comfortable with. And I made that pretty darn clear at the outset that I wasn't looking for anything in particular, no agenda, but I wanted to just hear how they wanted to do it.
And John was fantastic, everybody that's on this call. He did everything right, and they were so appreciative. I mean, he got responses about payment. Well, we were talking about switching from gift cards to a check. And I mean, those answers came through so fast. He was so on board, and they are really trusting of John, to the fact that they're fine doing a panel now. So I think that speaks volumes to the open conversation that they felt they could have with you. So I mean, I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you for the compliment. I thought I would pass it on to you too.
I'm so sorry. I thought I was muted when I left, but I don't think the rest of the attendees can see the comment. But Terry Forlitty wrote, "We need more Johns," no pun intended, which made me laugh hard.
Gosh.
But yeah, I think the key is really, first of all, the way that we bring in the voice matters. And what has worked on teams is for folks who have existing relationships to, to work with folks that they know, that they have already spoken to, that are ready to do this. And then that helps with that ongoing kind of after the fact, how do you feel, debrief, and continuing to maintain that trust. So we've got a couple other audience questions I want to get to, and we are shockingly to no one going a little long already. We still have plenty of time till 11:30, but want to get through everything. So what type of agency or decision-making power do the survivors have over the revisions? And then also, does survivor happen, does it mean exclusively people who've been through the safe harbor system? So I can speak to that second part really quickly and then pass the first part off to the rest of you. When we're talking about survivors, particularly the ones who've been providing the feedback on the protocols, they've primarily been adults, which is one of the reasons why it's possible to have a contract with them. But then also that means that some of them haven't been through the safe harbor system. Some of them have just been connected with folks unofficially, with navigators or with other folks, depending on their age. And then some of them also have been in the system. So it's a little bit of a mixture.
Yeah, the three that are being consulted with in Wright County and now Crow Wing County are all adults, have not utilized safe harbor services themselves. Two of them have worked for a safe harbor program at some point in their life, and then one I met working, well, all I met is working as a navigator, but one I just met is working as a navigator, and we ended up having discussions. And you know, when you have open discussions, things come out, and I was really happy to know that it felt like a safe place. And so yeah, these individuals were adults. Like I said, the youth survey that we did in Crow Wing County was targeted towards safe harbor programs. So I sent it out to safe harbor, the navigators, and then different coordinators of safe harbor programs throughout the state to share with their youth if they wanted to participate. And again, we did that just so that we knew that if any feelings came up from this survey, that they had a support system in place and that we were targeting the right population. You know, a lot of our homeless and runaway youth, you know, we know are at high risk and are potentially being exploited or trafficked as well. But I wanted to make sure that we were sending it out to specifically safe harbor programs so that I knew they had the support systems in place. And then as for the decision making, I think we all can say, and I won't speak for everyone, but I can assume that we'll all say that we all value safe harbor or survivor voice greatly. John already mentioned the revisions that are going to come in the future in Wright County based off the feedback that the 3 survivors provided to Wright County. But also it's a group effort. Right. So making sure that before we make changes, that the whole protocol group is on board. And I haven't had or seen any pushback really. And John, I'll let you jump in here, but I really haven't heard any pushback in Wright County on survivor voice.
No, I think, but that's a really good question because it's an accountability question, and we don't really have a good answer to that at this point. But that's actually something for me to think about. I think I have a lot of psychological pressure to incorporate what they are putting in there because I know they're going to look at it again. And so I think that maybe that's one way of answering that is to, you know, build into your protocol that if you're having a survivor group or you're having a survivor opine on a certain aspect of your protocol or the whole thing, then they need to be able to look at what you've done and comment on the changes you've made. And I think that's what's going to happen here. So, you know, we don't have it specifically built in, but I know they're going to be looking at it in the future. And if I want to stay true to my word that I value their input, I need to make those changes. But it's a great question. I don't think I have the right answer at this point as to how we're really going to incorporate that. You know, the team has been very, they've been very receptive to a lot of the changes. The issue with changes, though, is when you have 3 people making, you know, 150 comments to your protocol. You know, how do you overhaul a 30, you know, page document completely? You know, that's, you know, with 20 different team members, that's, you know, who all want to have a voice as well. So there's a lot of challenges there, but I think building something into your protocol about having the victims or survivors reanalyze your protocol and reassess it at you know, different times periodically. I think that's one step in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I know one of the pieces of that was also being able to then sit down with the folks that you contracted with and say, here's what we were able to change and here's what we were not. A quick question. And then there's another question in the chat, and then we're going to move on to the next topic. But can any of you share an example of a protocol change that was driven by youth survivor input? And I assume this means youth survivor or survivor in general, depending on.
Well, I know John made a lot of changes to definitions at the beginning of our protocol to be more trauma informed and survivor focused. I can say for Crow Wing County, we're still finalizing our draft. So any input that we get is going right in there. So we haven't had to do a lot of revision. We've just tried to incorporate it throughout, but that's because we're in our first year of it. So we're really still in the infancy in Crow Wing County and trying to bring it in right away before we make a final draft. Because, you know, but yeah, John, I'll let you speak to that.
Well, we had survivors saying, yeah, your protocol looks fine, but where's the accountability piece? Where's the evaluation going to occur? We didn't really have that built in, so that is something we added in our protocol in response to their comments. Is like, is this a lot of window dressing? Or are you actually going to do something and reevaluate? So we did make that change. That's just one example, but I made multiple changes to the protocol based on their comments.
We did actually have one specific example. I mean, there were a number of different things along the lines that John talked about. The one specific example that came about as a change had to do in terms of phones and keeping the police using the phones and having those, and then leaving the survivor without a means of communication. Within the protocol, we put in there that they would be provided with a phone when in those situations where they were going to be examining information or using information that goes into the prosecution of the case of a perpetrator, of a John or a pimp, and the phone would be kept in some way, that they wouldn't be left without a phone, that they would be provided one right away. Because that was a big deal for the person who was talking about, how do I continue to communicate and how do I continue to survive that way? So that was one specific change along the lines of other things that were put in place as far as respect and as far as developing the best possible outcome in each situation.
Yeah, we had one other quick question, but I'm begging us to move along. But the question is money the only acceptable form of compensation? Which I think is a really good question. We talk a lot about the importance of money as being something that is just really foundational to folks. And we were able to do that because we had these funds from MDH. But what are some other thoughts that folks might have moving forward about how we can compensate survivors?
I think that we have to treat these individuals as professionals because they are acting as such. Just like I wouldn't be compensated in anything other than a paycheck. I think it really needs to be intentional when people are applying for grants and looking for new grants to apply for, that if they want Survivor Voice, they need to be really intentional about how they're going to pay for it. I don't know if anyone has other thoughts, but that's my...
I think that's a good place to leave it. I think there's other options always, but it really is ideal, especially when we're talking to folks about something that is such a huge part of their life, and economics are such a big part of everything surrounding that. To really be able to provide that replacement is really key. All right, so we're going to move on to training and implementation. And before we get going in that, I want to ask the audience another question. Want to find out where folks are in the process, and you're able to use multiple choice. So for folks who are in a team, let us know where you're at and where your team is at as well. We have quite a mix here. That's fantastic. All right, I'm going to end polling in just a sec. Got most. All right, so we've got a lot of folks who are on existing teams, some in pretty early stages, but a little bit of everything. Someone still considering starting a team, so that's fantastic. So the next thing we're going to talk about is training and implementation. So once you've got a protocol, what do you do with it? How do you actually make it into something that gets used, gets shared, and it's not just something that you wrote down and now it looks nice sitting on your shelf, or is just a great digital document that you can talk about having but not actually use. So for folks on the panel, what are some of the considerations when you were thinking about rolling out these new protocols?
Well, we were really fortunate that our Safe Harbor Regional Navigator is so involved in our team. Shout out to Andrea White with Olmsted County Victim Services. She's been really instrumental in planning for training and helping assist with discipline-specific training. I know Andrea worked closely with law enforcement when they were doing their protocol training this fall, and we were able to do a webinar that was kind of introduced the topics of safe harbor, trafficking, and sexual exploitation for those new staff, and it was recorded, so we'll be able to use that ongoing as people are onboarding at different agencies.
You know, we really have talked in Crow Wing County about a mixture of ways to train. So we've talked about webinars so that it can be used as onboarding and we can get to everybody. You know, think about some patrol shifts for law enforcement. And I know, Alan, in the past, you've done like 1 a.m. trainings really quick, but we've talked about having these trainings accessible. You know, you think about medical staff and turnover at different places. So webinars. We've also talked about doing like a very, very in-depth all-day training, bringing in experts from various fields to do almost a train the trainer for each agency so that they can go back with those best practices, you know, where they're coordinating between prosecution and law enforcement and child protection, and how are we going to share information if child protection closes a case, but law enforcement still has it open. We don't want that potential trafficker to know that they're being looked at. So how are we going to coordinate so that child protection keeps that case open longer? You know, so really diving into some of these ins and outs and best practices through in-depth full day training that will then be brought back to each discipline as a train the trainer situation. And again, just ongoing trainings. That's in every single section of our protocol for each discipline is their commitment to ongoing collaboration. So revision of the protocol, evaluation of the protocol, sitting and having someone from their agency sit on different task force meetings, and then the ongoing training. So at least yearly training to staff is incorporated into the protocol, which I think is really awesome. We've also initiated a juvenile risk assessment team in Crow Wing County. And so that team will meet monthly to assess high-risk youth through MOUs so that there can be some open discussion about youth so that we can be a little bit proactive and implement those best practices that we established in our protocol.
All right, does anyone have any other thoughts on that? All right, did any of you, and I'm asking this like I don't know, let's talk a little bit about what it took to get buy-in from agency leadership or community members.
I'll jump in and start there. I was fortunate enough to actually be working with a really great existing group, an anti-trafficking task team. They had been just doing some phenomenal things, and they were really trying to take a look at what would be the next progression. And protocol development was definitely that. So the buy-in was a little bit easier in terms of you had a group there was committed to do something, but it still had to go up the chain because there's a whole lot of time that goes through this. But then also in terms of continuing to validate the work that they were doing, that need to be, because it's a long process. It doesn't just, it's not one and done and it's over with. And so there needed to be some internal communication going on all the time, meeting notes being shared, talking about how this has an impact within the agency or within the departments there. Continually doing that type of communication up and down the channels helps the buy-in continue. So the buy-in was actually there in the beginning, But as it continues to process and drag on or take quite a bit of time, that type of internal communication was very important to sustain it. Otherwise, there might have been some pushback like, is this thing ever going to get done? What's really going to happen? I mean, I don't know what exactly how that would come across, but they would continue to see this is good stuff in the process, and we're excited about the journey and where it ends, and we're going to embrace what comes out of it, instead of that aspect of like, let's hurry up and get it done, or at the end like, oh, this is all you got. They knew what was that it's coming their way.
You know, at the beginning of our process, when we were first doing the initial grant, we had various letters of support from multiple agencies, kind of laying that foundation up front of what the expectations were and what we were going to produce as a team. And then at the end, and also we just kind of left out that some of those agencies were already involved in our sexual assault team as well. And then once we had a finished printed protocol, we invited agency leadership to a luncheon because you can always get people with food, and brought them together to really talk about the history of the team, the protocol development process, what training would look like for different disciplines, and also to celebrate the work of the finished protocol.
I guess one thing also I'd like to kind of add to that in the beginning, what's really, and it was part of the process that MNCASA had put in there, was that having MOUs and that this memorandum of understanding needed to be signed by someone, you know, who has that authority and that ability to do that. So having that kind of structure in place really also helped for the buy-in up and down the channels.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question in the comments pertaining to the juvenile risk monthly meetings. And the question is, who attends from law enforcement? Who's at those monthly meetings?
I did just send her, I was typing, I don't know if I looked zoned out. I did just send her a direct message, or Kim a direct message as well. But we have in Crow Wing County, and every county is a little bit different for what law enforcement departments they have, but we have representation from the Sheriff's Department, as well as 3 local PDs, Brainerd, Baxter, and Crosby, who have been really instrumental in the building of our protocol. And for Brainerd and Baxter, they have somebody that is working in the schools that is attending those meetings to really get a good perspective from our insight of our high-risk youth, and get the schools involved when we know, especially during a pandemic, the schools just have such limited capacity to do more. And then what we've talked about are, because we have a lot of different small PDs, I think we have 8 different PDs in Crow Wing County. And so for some of those smaller departments that don't necessarily have the resources to attend a monthly meeting, we would bring them in as we have cases that involve their area of coverage. In addition, we have prosecution, probation, CPS, and advocacy.
Awesome. Cool, thank you. All right. Our final topic area is sustainability. So again, please jump in with your questions in the Q&A. When we're talking about protocol, one of the things that we highlight, particularly at MNCASA when we're talking about these systems change processes with these teams, is that this is a continuous, ongoing, never-ending cycle, which sounds sort of like doomsday, but it's a good thing. These protocols are iterative. They change because we learn. So the teams are going through a constant cycle of looking at the situation, the status quo in their communities, making changes to their response, and then looking at how these changes are working. Are we doing what we said we would do? Is it effective? Have there been any unintended consequences of the work that we're doing? And then going back to making the change, and on and on and on it goes. So when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about institutionalizing these protocols within trainings, in disciplines, maintaining communication across disciplines, maintaining that team, and then also evaluating our work. This is also an area, these teams are all pretty new. So we're still kind of just tiptoeing into this realm right now. But what are some of the next steps for your teams?
Well, I'll start off, and that's kind of one of the things that Sarah's leading us in for our retreat that's scheduled in November, is really taking a look at that sustainability and what's next. How do we continue on? How do we celebrate the great work that has actually taken place? But not then just resting on the laurels and saying, hey, it's all done, because it really needs to be a living document that continues on. One of the things though that I find and I'm old school, but I also still see that there's credence in what I'm going to say, is that there's nothing like a book. We've been dealing with, I guess, concepts and theories and practices, but institutionalizing it by actually having that book and say, we've got this, let's go back to this book, let's take a look at this, and then actually being able to use that book in terms of a leverage for some of the partners that aren't in there yet. John had talked about trying to get schools on board. We've also had some issues there where we thought they were on board and then it kind of waned a bit. Our partners are actually excited about being able to go, hey, we want to show you what we've done, sit down, have one-on-one conversations and say, and what's missing now is you. It creates a little pressure because there it is. It's absent right in front of you. You're not there. So sometimes I think positive peer pressure is a really good thing. And so the sustainability is, how do we expand this? How do we make this larger? How do we really make this a community response to exploitation and trafficking? And being able to then look at that, what's next is beyond the institutions, within the community, and how are people going to play a part in this, because we want them involved so that it is a total community response. So that's really kind of where we're looking at what's the next steps, because it has to continue to move and move and move and move along. So we're actually kind of excited about the retreat as far as what that will look like, because it'll help give us ideas of saying, how do we continue to make this more public too as well?
I would agree. I'm really excited for Sarah to come and run a retreat for our group as well. Sorry, Sarah. But yeah, it's, figuring out what we want it to look like moving forward. We have set up, or actually I should say, we're built out of a task force that was already meeting every other month called the Brainerd Lakes Area Sex Trafficking Team, or BLAST. And so we will continue meeting as that group. Again, we've talked about how often we're going to be making updates to our protocol. There's lots of turnover, there's lots of changes in funding. So making sure that that's up to date. So it's still a usable document. We don't want to put all this work into it for it to not be worth anything to anybody in a couple of years. We want to continue to update it so it's a good resource for people. I think, one thing we've also talked about is case-by-case evaluation, so that it's not so in your face, I guess, is a good way to put it. We want to have just casual conversations about how things are going and hold each other accountable. And that's part of that juvenile risk assessment team, is we have cases coming in and we're actively looking for these individuals and trying to offer them services and respond with best practices. We can evaluate how that's going and hold each other accountable. I think Sarah said in a recent meeting she had with myself and my director that she would hate to be on my bad side, because I'm like, I'm going to hold you guys accountable and we're going to do the work together. But no, I think it's finding who's going to be that person in your group too, who has the time. Honestly, as part of being a navigator, that's kind of part of my job as well, is to check in and see how things are going. And so for Crow Wing County, I guess it makes sense for me to kind of run those meetings and continue to run them. But it's finding that person that's going to be able to have those discussions. And in some communities that wouldn't be me, and I'd be looking to somebody else. Maybe it's your county attorney that's able to have those discussions because they have that really strong rapport and respect in the community. But whoever that might be, to run those discussions so that it's not, you're not creating walls by checking in to see or reminding when we don't follow our protocol. So I don't know if that fully answered it, but.
Yeah, I think that was very helpful. Excuse me while I move my cat. She leaves me alone until I'm in a webinar. It's fine. Yeah, does anyone else have anything to add about this? I know this is an area where we're really just starting these conversations because we're just getting the protocols off the ground. But one of the, we talk a lot about the need for, my cat does feel better. Yeah, sorry, that was not a comment that you could all read, which I just now realized. But yesterday my cat was not feeling well, and today Cordelia is much better and back to her usual self. So hence here she is visiting. Talking about how to incorporate evaluation from the start into these processes. What are we measuring, and how can we share that information, and really trying to think about how to be doing that throughout. Obviously surveys with folks that we serve is kind of the ever popular, but also not very easy method, but also asking then within agencies, how is this working for you? Asking your fellow law enforcement officers, is the protocol working? Is it doing what we wanted it to? Are you having struggles with that? We have a question coming in. Oh my gosh. So a question from our MDH Safe Harbor evaluator, Jory, who, if you have not met, is phenomenal. Asking if it would benefit us for her to operationalize the protocols into a questionnaire for teams to implement in their areas. I don't know what you all coordinators think. I personally feel like that would be fantastic. Does anyone have any thoughts on that or other evaluation related stuff?
I would love to see what that looks like. Yeah. I think that and what I think is really hard is we need to remember that in my world, sex trafficking and exploitation is my whole job. And so I think it's really important to remember that our community partners are doing all of their other jobs. And I think that we come to the table and have really, really good intentions to follow this protocol, to be reaching out when we have concerns and making consults, and it's all really good. But I think it takes a lot of time to embed that and have it become a natural process. And because there's so much other things going on, and people have large caseloads, and there are county budgets, and there are things that are happening where people have unreasonable workloads sometimes. And so just having some patience with it as well, and remembering to have this ongoing discussion when things go really well, and celebrating when things go really well, and then talking through how we can make this process maybe easier, more accessible at times too. And so I just want to point that out. I think, having these questionnaires and having these meetings and sitting down in this headspace to talk about it is one thing. And it's completely different when you're out in the field, boots to the ground, doing the work. And it might take a while for it to become second nature to follow the protocol.
I think that's a really key piece. Anytime we're talking about systems change, especially a multidisciplinary attempt, just allowing the grace for the fact that this process takes time. All of our systems, whether we're from small or large agencies, whether we're government or nonprofit, we're constantly going through change, but also intentional change is a process that requires some thought and some mistakes and some revisions, and just knowing that we're not going to get it right the first time. And that's one of the keys with this protocol development process too, and the fact that it's a continuous cycle, is knowing what you write and what you publish is not going to be the be all end all. You're going to make mistakes. And even if you have what you think is a perfect protocol, then something in society will change. The world will change. We'll have a global pandemic. Nobody was planning for that. You know, we had teams with a really strong training and implementation plan, and then everybody went virtual for 8 months. So just kind of giving yourself the grace to realize that there's going to be bumps along the way. This is hard work. There's a reason why our systems don't change quickly. There's a reason why things take a while. And so just knowing that and kind of being prepared for that when you start the process, I think can be really helpful.
And I don't see any other questions coming through, but do you mind if I just make one quick shout out that I am realizing we hadn't talked about it all today, and that's cultural responsiveness and building in that into your protocol. And I think that's really tough. I mean, I'm in Crow Wing County, and we know we have you know, disproportionately our Native American population is being victimized through exploitation and trafficking. But we don't have a, you know, culturally specific program necessarily to have on our team. So how are we building that language in? And I am going to say this because I know Annie hopped off, and so she was on at the beginning and she's not on now, so I can throw her under the bus a little bit. But Annie, the West Central navigator out of Someplace Safe, is absolutely wonderful. She's taking a look at our protocol to help us figure out how we can embed some culturally specific language throughout, and definitions throughout, and best practices throughout. She is a wonderful resource. I don't mean to add work to her plate, but if you know somebody that has similar experience, or if you know her and you're building your protocol, I just really suggest finding a way to first get in touch with what cultural representation do we have in our community, and who can take a look to make sure we're embedding it, because there's not always going to be specific resources, but we can embed language that helps us be more appropriate and aware.
Absolutely. And this is one of those areas where, again, kind of like survivor voice, we talk a lot about the importance of it. And as you can see by looking at our cameras, there's a lot of white people having these conversations. And that is what it is. And we are, as along with the rest of the state, really trying to make changes and shifts to better represent the folks that we're serving. One of the teams that is not on this panel today is actually working on creating some focus groups specifically for the various communities that are represented in their community. And so I'm hoping that I will be able to chat with them about that process and have some information to share with folks this winter. I'm not going to call them out because they are not on this call, but really hoping to be able to provide you with some more specific resources on how to engage culturally specific communities in this work in a way that, again, is equitable and not tokenizing. Do any panelists have anything else they want to add? Seeing silence. We've got another question. A question from the MDH evaluator. Again, Jory, yes, absolutely. I will be reaching out to you, and I think we can definitely talk more about how we can partner with you to get some of these processes moving. We also have another question asking who from the East Metro is here on the call. And I don't know what you all are able to see in terms of lists of participants, but I know we've got Mary McRoy, the East Metro Navigator, is here. Terry Forlitty is here from Breaking Free. I cannot tell who else. Jory from MDH, a couple of people who are working with folks statewide. So yeah. Awesome. All right, I'm not seeing any final questions. So I think we will say our goodbyes. Thank you all for joining us today. This has been recorded, so we'll have it emailed out to you, and then also it'll be on the MNCASA website. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to contact either myself or any of the panelists. I've got our emails up here on the screen, and I'm sure that they would all love to hear from you because this has been, I think, some of the most complicated and challenging, but really interesting and meaningful work that I've ever done. And I know we've learned a lot, and it's been a really cool process working with all of you coordinators, kind of figuring this out as we go. So thank you all. Thanks for being with us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.